the day Dragon discovered the truth about Garp. In the last chapters of One Piece, we saw that Garp, the legendary marine hero, was captured during the confrontation at Hachinosu, the pirate island commanded by Marshal D. Teach, Blackbeard. This seemingly isolated event could be the trigger for something much bigger. The awakening of the wrath of Monkey D. Dragon, the most wanted man in the world, and leader of the Revolutionary Army. But what if Garp's capture is precisely the breaking point that makes Dragon act directly for the first time, showing the true power that the world fears but has never seen? Dragon is a character shrouded in mystery since his first appearance. We know that he is Luffy's father, Garp's son and leader of the greatest antagonistic force to the world government. However, throughout the narrative, Oda never revealed the true limit of his power, and this is intentional. Dragon is not just a strategist. He is the man who carries the title of the most dangerous in the world, and that title needs to have a foundation. And here the theory begins. According to what we saw in Hachinosu, Garp was defeated while trying to save Kobe. Blackbeard and his crew proved to be more organized than ever, even counting on Aokiji, a former Navy admiral. This means that, at this moment, one of the symbols of justice and one of the pillars of the old Navy era is in the hands of the man who most symbolizes pirate chaos. Now think with me. Dragon, the world government's greatest enemy, upon discovering that his own father was captured, would he stand by? Unlikely. It's important to remember that Dragon doesn't act without purpose. He always waits for the right moment, but Garp is not just any name. To the world, he is a hero. To Dragon, he is the father who believed that even within the Navy, there was still justice. And if the world government decided to ignore Garp's capture, that would be, for Dragon, the final proof that the system your father defended all his life is beyond repair. In other words, Garp's capture could be the perfect emotional and strategic point for Dragon to act, both for personal and political reasons. Because by freeing Garp, Dragon wouldn't just be saving his father. He'd be sending a message to the entire world. Neither the Navy, nor the Yonkou, nor the world government are above the revolution. Another detail that reinforces this theory is Oda's narrative pattern. He always makes characters who seem distant from the plot return with great impact when the balance of the world is about to change. It was like that with Shanks in Marineford, with Sabo in Dressrosa, and it could be like that with Dragon now. Since the Reverie, the Revolutionary Army has been moving in secret. We know that they invaded Mary Geoise, declared war on the Celestial Dragons, and managed to escape. But so far, Dragon himself has never made it onto the field, which suggests Oda is saving this moment for something monumental, and what event could be more personal and explosive than the kidnapping of his own father by Blackbeard? If we look at the scale of power within the work, few characters have yet to show their abilities. Among them are Nose, Kong, Shanks in its entirety, and Dragon. The four are figures that symbolize absolute power within their respective axes: government, army, piracy, and revolution. Therefore, Dragon's awakening would be a direct response to Teach's move, a Yonkou who threatens the world's balance. And there is one more detail that supports this line. Dragon is often associated with storms and wind. Each time he appears, there is a change in weather, thunder, or a violent gust that symbolizes the atmospheric power around him. This is no coincidence. So, the most accepted theory among fans is that Dragon has a Logia or mythical Zoan-type devil fruit linked to wind, storms, or even a weather god. Something like Fufu no Mi, the wind fruit, or a fruit based on Raijin, the Japanese god of thunder and storm. If this is true, then Dragon wouldn't just be a genius strategist, he would be a conscious natural disaster, capable of manipulating the weather itself and wiping out entire islands, which would explain why the world government considers him the greatest living threat. Based on this, we can imagine the following logical sequence. Dragon receives information about Garp's capture, tries to confirm with his sources within the Navy, and discovers that the world government decided not to interfere. This awakens in him a personal anger, not just against Teach, but against the entire system. Dragon gathers the Revolutionary Army commanders, Sabo, Ivankov, Karasu, and Morley, and declares that they will act. The destination? Hachinosu, the nest of the worst pirates alive. And if that happens, we're not just talking about a bailout. We are talking about one of the greatest ideological and political clashes in the history of One Piece. The revolution against chaos. That would be the beginning of the storm. The moment the most dangerous man in the world decides to stop just observing and start acting. And if there's one thing Oda has been building towards little by little, it's exactly this turning point. The moment when Dragon, Luffy's father and Garp's son, enters the fray. The world as we know it will simply not be the same after this. The storm over Hachinosu. If Dragon does indeed decide to act, the attack on Hachinosu Island would not be just a rescue mission, it would be an act of world war. Up until this point in the story, the Revolutionary Army has been operating in the shadows, sabotaging Navy supply routes, liberating kingdoms under the rule of the Celestial Dragons, and infiltrating agents within the government. But never at any point have we seen Dragon declare direct war on a Yonko, and that's exactly what would make this action different from anything we've seen before. The revolution turning, for the first time, against the chaos of piracy, and not just against the world government. The meaning of invading Hachinosu. Hachinosu, Pirate Island, is the heart of Blackbeard's crew. Hundreds of criminals, former bounty hunters, marine deserters, and stolen devil fruit users live there. It's practically hell in the form of a territory. Invading this place would be the equivalent of invading Impel Down, but without the rules, without the laws, and without the limits. Dragon is not naive. He knows there is no easy victory against someone like Teach. But the revolutionary leader also understands something that Blackbeard has not yet realized. Everything that exists in the world revolves around symbols, and Garp, the marine hero, is the greatest symbol of all. To free Garp would be to destroy. In one fell swoop, Navy morale and Teach's prestige. While the whole world watches, it's a perfect political move, and one only Dragon would have the courage to pull off. The Revolutionaries movement. If this theory is confirmed, Dragon would not act alone. Sabo, Morley, Karasu, and Lindbergh would be the main executors of this operation, and strategically, this makes sense. New Dragon's right-hand man has a direct connection to Garp and Luffy. His presence would make the rescue both emotional and symbolic. Morley, with his Oshi no Mi, could literally open the ground of Hachinosu, creating underground tunnels for infiltration. Blackwater would control shadows and crows to carry out surprise attacks. Lindbergh, the scientist, would use technology to neutralize communications. The attack would be swift, precise, and silent, but it would inevitably culminate in a direct confrontation. And this is where one of the most interesting points of this theory comes in: Aokiji. Kiji, the ice obstacle. Ever since Aokiji allied himself with Teach's crew, the fandom has been debating whether he is truly loyal to Blackbeard or acting on his own. If he still holds ideals of justice, it's possible he's only within the Blackbeard pirates as an infiltrator, perhaps even under instruction from Dragon himself. But there is another, bolder scenario, that Dragon doesn't know this, and that Aokiji would become the Revolutionary Army's first major obstacle. Think of the impact this would have narratively. Dragon, the man who challenges the world government, faces a former Navy admiral in the middle of pirate territory, a struggle that would transcend ideologies, ice versus wind, order versus revolution. This battle would be the spiritual equivalent of that of Akainu versus Aokiji in Punk Hazard, but on an even larger scale. Dragon, representing the chaos of freedom; Aokiji, representing the cold neutrality of indecision. If Oda wants to show the true weight of the Revolutionary Army, this would be the perfect time. A Akuma no Mi de Dragon. And this is where the theory gains strength. The way the weather changes around Dragon is not a simple aesthetic detail. In all of the characters' appearances, the weather responds to his presence. During Luffy's rescue from Logtown, a sudden storm appears out of nowhere, which many believe to be the partial awakening of Dragon's power. Most likely, he has a wind Logia-type devil fruit, something like Kaze. Kaze no Mai, or a mythological fruit related to the god Raijin. This fruit would allow him to manipulate atmospheric currents, air pressure, and natural electricity. Imagine a fight between Aokiji's freezing power and Dragon's absolute mastery of winds and storms. The battlefield would be a true cataclysm. ice being destroyed by tornadoes. Colossal waves rising and black clouds covering the entire horizon. Aokiji could even try to freeze the sea, but Dragon would control the very air around him, shattering the ice with sonic blasts. It would be one of the most cinematic battles in the entire work. The political significance of the invasion. More than a physical confrontation, the invasion of Hachinosu would be a message to the world. The Navy and the world government have always tried to sell the idea that the Revolutionary Army is just a group of terrorists, but by freeing Garp, the government's greatest hero, Dragon, would completely transform that narrative. The people would see the Revolutionary Army as the real heroes, and not as villains. This movement would change public perception and divide the world into two currents: those who still believe in the government's imposed justice, and those who would begin to believe in the freedom promised by the revolution. And if there's one thing Oda has always made clear, it's that One Piece, it's not just a story about pirates, it's a story about freedom, and Dragon is the embodiment of this. The immediate consequences. If this invasion actually occurs, the whole world will react. The world government will declare the Revolutionary Army a god-level threat, equivalent to a natural disaster. The Navy, embarrassed, may be forced to take sides, which would create an internal division between officers who still respect Garp and those loyal to the government, os Yonkus Restantes. Like Shanks and Luffy, will inevitably be drawn into the conflict. And Teach, upon being defeated, could lose one of his commanders. Perhaps even Aokiji, completely changing the balance of the four emperors. This war would not just be between pirates and revolutionaries, it would be the beginning of the war that precedes the Forgotten Century, the turning point where the world of One Piece would begin to crumble. Dragon versus Aokiji. The clash between ice and wind. If there is a battle capable of completely redefining the balance of power in the world of One Piece, this would be the One Dragon against Aokiji. Not only because it represents a clash of elemental powers, but because it symbolizes the conflict between two philosophies that arose within the Navy itself and took opposite paths. On one side, Aokiji, the man who believed in lazy justice, someone who always questioned the government's methods, but who in the end remained bound by his loyalty to the institutions. On the other hand, Dragon, the man who looked at the same system and decided to destroy it completely. The wind against the ice, freedom against stagnation, the hero's son against the former admiral of justice. The past that unites and divides. Before any coup, there is history. Few people realize, but both Aokiji and Dragon were formed within the same ideal, that justice and order existed to protect the innocent. The difference is that Dragon saw the corruption of the world government from within, long before Aokiji, and chose the path of rebellion. Aokiji tried to change the system from within, and failed. The fight between them would therefore be the inevitable consequence of two views that cannot coexist. Dragon represents the wind that destroys the old to allow the new. Aokiji represents the ice that tries to preserve what remains of the structure. Even though it is already corrupted, it is the struggle of movement against inertia. The battlefield Hachinosu. Visualize the scenario. The Revolutionary Army advances on Hachinosu. The winds roar. Dark clouds cover the sky, and the sea, once calm, begins to swirl in colossal whirlpools. Teach's pirate ships attempt to fight back, but are destroyed before they even get close. Aokiji appears walking on the frozen sea, surrounded by ice crystals and steam. Dragon stares at him from a distance, his cape fluttering violently, and for a moment, the very air seems to bend around the two of them. A confrontation like that wouldn't just be physical, it would be atmospheric. The planet itself would react to the collision of their wills. A Teoria da Fufu no Mi. Many fans already believe that Dragon has the Fufu no Mi, a logia fruit of the wind. But there are those who go further, suggesting that it is a mythical zoan based on the god Raijin, the Japanese god of thunder and storms. Both hypotheses make sense, especially considering Oda's pattern of associating great leaders with natural forces, Kaido as a dragon, Enel as thunder, Fujitora as gravity, Akainu as magma, etc. If Dragon truly masters wind at the awakened level, that means he is capable of control the weather, alter atmospheric pressures, and manipulate oxygen, which would make him one of the most dangerous characters in the entire Work. Its power goes beyond destruction. It is total environmental control. Now imagine that against Aokiji, the man who dominates the ice. Extreme cold depends on the absence of heat, the absence of movement, and the wind. What is it? Pure movement, i.e., dragon is Aokiji's perfect counter-element, the theoretical battle. At the start of the match, Aokiji would attempt to freeze the entire field, turning the sea and part of the Hachinosu coast into a wall of ice. It's the same attacking style we saw against Akainu, a total defense creating distance. Dragon, on the other hand, would use air pressure to disintegrate the frozen structures, releasing waves of cutting wind that would travel in all directions. It would be a battle of colossal scale, where each attack would affect kilometers of terrain. With the power awakened, Dragon could create updrafts that would generate cyclones and lightning, using the electricity in the atmosphere itself to attack. This would turn the battlefield into a climatic chaos. Thunder, fog, hail, and devastating wind. Aokiji would try to freeze the air, reducing the temperature to the point where it would prevent wind circulation. But Dragon, manipulating the pressure, would break this barrier and return the blow with a sonic storm, an attack that Oda might even name as Shinra Tenpu, the Judgment of Heaven. This exchange would not only be visually epic, but full of symbolism. The wind, the invisible force that moves the world, breaking free from the ice, the cold prison of order, or Sabo paper. Amidst the chaos, Sabo would likely be the emotional intermediary between the two. He is the link between Garp and Dragon, and also the indirect inheritor of Ace's flame. Their presence on this battlefield would not only be strategic, but symbolic. Sabo could prevent the fight from reaching the point of total destruction, reminding Aokiji of something he himself said at Marineford. True justice changes depending on where you are. This line, echoing at the right moment, could be the narrative trigger for Aokiji to hesitate, realizing that perhaps Dragon is not the enemy, but rather the bringer of the change he himself desired. And this is where the boldest theory takes shape: the possibility of alliance. There is a possibility that few consider. What if Aokiji is not the enemy in this fight, but the test? What if Dragon knows he's infiltrated Teach's crew and uses this battle as a way to measure his loyalty? In this case, the duel between them would be a symbolic fight, a confrontation between ideals, and would end with mutual recognition. Aokiji would then allow Dragon to take Garp, while he would remain undercover with Teach, with an even greater purpose: observe the advance of darkness. This possibility makes perfect sense within Oda's construction, which rarely turns former admirals into direct villains. Aokiji has always been morally ambiguous, and a move like this would reposition him as a key piece on the story's final board. The conclusion of the battle. Regardless of whether Aokiji becomes an ally or an adversary, the outcome would be the same. The world would realize that Dragon finally took action. The fight between ice and wind would be the official announcement of the global revolution. World government broadcasts, newspapers, and spy networks could not hide a confrontation of this scale. Within hours, newspaper headlines would echo around the world. The most wanted man on the planet faces a former admiral. The era of silence is over, and from then on, everything would change. The world government, for the first time, would feel the true weight of revolution, and the name Monkey D. Dragon would no longer be just a ghost. It would become the symbol of the storm, Garp's rescue, and the beginning of the new era. There's one thing Eiichiro Oda does masterfully. It's transforming a simple event into a global milestone. And if this theory is confirmed, the Garp's rescue by Dragon would be one of those moments capable of altering the entire course of history. One Piece. The battle at Hachinosu would end in silence. The winds would cease. The melting ice would evaporate, and the sound of thunder would slowly fade away, leaving behind only debris, smoke, and the image of two men representing different eras. Aokiji, exhausted, would understand that Dragon is not there for power or revenge. He is there for conviction, and that sets him apart from every man Aokiji has ever faced. This understanding, even if silent, would mark the point at which the pieces of the world would begin to move. The meaning of Garp was never just a vice admiral. He was the man who, amid centuries of oppression and manipulation, managed to inspire genuine faith within the Navy. To many sailors, he was proof that there was still true justice under the banner of the world government. And exactly for that reason, his capture was a deep moral blow. Now imagine the impact of seeing him released, not by the Navy, but by his own son, the most wanted man in the world. The public narrative would change completely. The government's hero being saved by the leader of the revolution would be the greatest symbolic blow ever dealt to the celestial dragons. The world would stop seeing Dragon as a terrorist and would start seeing him as the new hero. The man who did what the government did not have the courage to do. A retirada de Hachinosu after the defeat of the pirate fleet and the partial collapse of the island, the revolutionaries would retreat. Morley would open gigantic underground tunnels, allowing the evacuation of Garp, Sabo, and part of the Allied forces. Karasu would cover the sky with black crows, creating a veil of shadows to mislead surveillance aircraft. Dragon, however, would be the last to leave. Before leaving, he would raise his arm to the sky, and according to the most popular theories, would release a gust of wind so intense that it would create a colossal tornado, completely sweeping across Teach Harbor. That would be the final blow, not just a show of force, but a message etched into the world's landscape. The wind of revolution can no longer be contained. Oda could use this moment in a cinematic way, showing Hachinosu being swallowed by a cyclone, while Dragon's voice echoes, "The world will be remade." Whether you like it or not, the global impact a few hours later, newspapers around the world would carry headlines that would shake every corner of the planet. Dragon invades Hachinosu and defeats Blackbeard's fleet. Garp rescued. The kingdoms allied with the world government would react with panic. The Navy would be divided. One part would see Dragon as an even more dangerous criminal. The other as the true defender of justice that the government betrayed. Akainu, enraged, would likely summon another buster call, not against a kingdom, but against the revolutionary army itself. Meanwhile, the five elders, fearing the political effect of this act, would try to silence the news, but it would already be too late. The truth would have spread faster than the wind. The reunion of father and son back at the revolutionary base. Garp would awaken injured but alive. The old hero, his face covered in scars, would look at Dragon and laugh. Even without seeing this scene officially, it would become one of the most powerful in history. Garp, the man who believed that justice could exist within the system, would now be faced with the son who proved otherwise. And for the first time, perhaps he understood, Dragon is not a criminal. He is the consequence of the corruption he himself ignored. The old man would smile, saying something simple, yet symbolic. "You've always been stubborn, but this time I'm proud." This exchange, however brief, would be the perfect emotional conclusion to Garp's arc, and the beginning of Dragon's true revolution. The political repercussions with Garp safe, the revolutionary army would gain international legitimacy. The neutral kingdoms, especially those that had suffered under the rule of the celestial dragons, would begin to secretly align themselves with Dragon's cause. Mary Jawaz, in turn, would collapse internally. The Gorosei would realize that the old structure of fear and censorship no longer worked. Garp's release would be seen as the first step in destroying the myth of the world government. And this is where the most important point of this theory comes in. Dragon's action in Hachinosu, it wouldn't just be a rescue, it would be the trigger for the final war. The beginning of the new era. The world of One Piece has always been divided into three forces: the world government, the pirates, and the revolution. But so far, these forces have remained in balance, watching, calculating, waiting for the right moment. Rescuing Garp would break this balance completely. The world government would become unstable and vulnerable. Oas Yonkus. Especially Teach and Shanks would realize that the final stage is forming. The allied kingdoms would begin to question their loyalty. Luffy, upon learning what had happened, would finally see his father's name splashed across headlines, not as a villain, but as the man who ignited the wind of freedom. Oda has been preparing for this moment for years. From the beginning, when Dragon looked up at the sky in Logetown and said, "The world is waiting for your answer, Luffy." Perhaps that was not just an encouragement to his son, but a premonition, a warning that the real confrontation would not be between pirates and the Navy, but between the gods and the wind. The final symbolism in the universe of One Piece, the wind has always been a symbol of freedom. He appears when Luffy sets out on a new journey, when Roger smiles before his execution, and when a crew's flag begins to flutter. The wind is always present when a new era begins. And Dragon, the man whose very name means the one who brings the storm, would be responsible for releasing this wind on a global scale. Oda always said that the story of One Piece is, at its core, the story of how the world will become free. And in this theory, the moment when Dragon saves Garp would be the definitive sign that the era of world government is coming to an end. Conclusion, if this theoretical line is correct, Garp's rescue wouldn't be an isolated arc. It would be the beginning of the last great act of One Piece, proof that the world is about to collapse not at the hands of a pirate, but by the hands of the man who controls the wind itself, a man called Monkey D. Dragon, the true herald of freedom, the beginning of the final storm. And that was today's theory. What do you think? Will Dragon really free Garp and change the world? One Piece forever? Leave your opinion in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and remember, here, every bit of mystery matters. I am the Mr. Piece, and we'll see you in the next video!